For this week's episode of Hidden People, I have the real privilege of being in the rehearsal room of the Armenian Philharmonic Orchestra, and my guest is Arman Padaryan. Thank you, Arman, for allowing us to come to the Philharmonic Orchestra and spend a few minutes with you. You are the Deputy Director and General Producer for the Armenian Philharmonic Orchestra. You are a music and concert manager. Actually, you have very many titles and you wear many different hats in the world of music and production. You are the country director now for several years of Yeraz Art Incorporated and of the Hover Chamber Choir of Armenia, the general producer and managing director. I would say you are one of the few real qualified music producers in Armenia. In a country that has such a deep, rich heritage and legacy of music. How is it, first of all, that you decided to fall into or become a music and concert manager?
Actually, I started to become involved with the classical music when I was already working with the Brusov University as a lecturer. But my love towards music, classical music, was pretty strong, and it probably comes from my family. My dad was a professional trained classical musician, a violinist. And when I was a kid, he and I started to listen to rock music, you know. And he said, "You will be back."
Back to classical music.
Back to classical music. And suddenly I found myself starting some work with the classical music groups, and it was a quartet, then it was a chamber orchestra, then I started to work with the chamber choir, and now I'm working with the symphonic orchestra, and this is Armenian Philharmonic Orchestra. Probably I was just gaining experience from smaller groups to bigger groups.
I say this all the time, and I often sound like a broken record, and but for me it's a factual truth. We're a very small nation, we're a very small country, barely 3 million people, yet there seems to be this overabundance of talent. You know, Armenia is the kind of country that many different people come to, whether they're diasporan Armenians, whether they're foreigners, whether they're here for tourism. And you know, they will go and see a performance by the Philharmonic or by the chamber orchestra, or they will go and see Anush opera. And invariably, they are always awestruck by the level of talent that exists. At the same time, I often wonder how difficult it must be to manage a symphonic orchestra with the vast amount of instruments that the orchestra needs. Financially, how does that work? I mean, how much does a French horn cost, for example? And do the musicians have their own instruments, or are there? You know, I remember years ago a Canadian musician, a clarinetist, had come, and she was amazed at the music that the orchestra was able to make on these very old. You know, she called it pieces of tin almost. I mean, she was amazed that they were able to make music from the instruments that they had at their disposal.
Of course, the problem of having instruments, not only in the orchestra but also in the music schools, is still there. I'm happy to say that a couple of months ago was a decision coming from the government that the new instruments will be purchased for the Armenian Philharmonic Orchestra and for other major orchestral groups, and this will be really a big joy and celebration all over the professional world in this country.
So the government decides that they are going to pay from state funds?
They are going to pay for the new instruments, especially the wind and brass, and also double bass instruments will be bought for the Armenian Philharmonic Orchestra, also timpani. Because violins, you know, violins are getting better with age, but not, we can say the same about the wind and brass.
So a violin, if it's 100 years old, and if it's...
If it's Italian, it costs a fortune.
Okay. But a wind instrument?
Wind instruments, when they get old, they simply get worse.
They don't get better with age.
No, they cannot get
so
better with age.
what would be the lifespan, let's say, for?
There are instruments which are very good from 3 to 7 years.
That's it.
That's it. But we're playing instruments which are 30, 40-year-old. If you visit music schools, you can find their rarities aged 50. We need more instruments, more pupils, more teachers. And I hope that the situation should be getting better, because it's the culmination of decline we already passed now. The program of support from the government promises that new instruments will be introduced, and it will be a boost, obviously, should be.
How many musicians play in the orchestra today?
108.
108.
108.
And you have wind, you have brass,
Definitely.
you have string, you have...
Any conventional symphonic orchestra has only 3 instruments. And with this program we will have also rarity instruments such as Wagner tubas.
What percentage of the instruments that you have that are utilized today would, I don't know, the Toronto Symphony use, or they would say this is not usable? I mean, is 70% of the instruments today of the orchestra workable instruments, or no?
Definitely musicians keep them in due order, but the age is something which you always should pay attention to. They need like extra attention, because there are instruments which are very difficult to play since they are so old. Like we have bass clarinets, or another instrument like bassoons, which are pretty old.
Again, a question from somebody who is not a musician. How would it improve the sound of the orchestra if today, by some great luck, all of the instruments were of the quality and standard that some of the major orchestras? How would it impact the sound that comes from the orchestra?
A good musician can play even a bad instrument with utmost class, believe me. Since we have probably the best musicians in Armenia who work with the Philharmonic, they are able to play even the old instruments with due quality.
It's really a testament to their ability and agility as musicians and professionals, isn't it? That they are
Absolutely.
able.
Even if a world-class violinist takes a bad violin, still he will produce marvelous sounds. Of course, it will not be that fantastic, but the class is is there, you know.
Talent in Armenia, and somehow I don't know that Armenian music culture has really exploded onto the international platform. So when somebody hears something, they know that this is Armenian. Have we been able to brand, other than the duduk, perhaps?
In certain surroundings, duduk is really important. It's a sort of transcendent instrument. It is now introduced to classical music scores as well. If you take soundtracks, for example, to some Hollywood movies, the folk instrument, which is duduk, is there. It adds some interesting colors, of course. But Armenian composers, Armenian music, of course, branded itself in the world. We can remember Armenian Khachaturian or Komitas or Arno Babajanyan, Mirzoyan, Terteran. There are very many interesting names, not really that many.
But there are.
But they are. And the problem that we need to all remember is to perform this music regularly. It's like in Alice in Wonderland, you always need to run in order to stay in one place. It's an interesting proverb. So when we travel abroad and we say this is Komitas, people, they always learn this name and they say how wonderful. But since we go abroad like not that often, 9-10 times a year it's maximum. Speaking about the choir or a chamber group, with symphonic orchestra it can travel 1 time a year, 2 times a year.
When was the last time that the Philharmonic was actually able to travel abroad?
Armenian Philharmonic Orchestra toured pretty a lot until quite recently. Several projects due to some problem with agents didn't happen. This December, on December 25, we should have been in China, for example.
Really?
Yes, but due to some problems with the Chinese agency, it didn't happen. It was postponed to next year. Besides, next year we are traveling to Austria, Italy, and Slovakia because it's already set, the concerts. And from recent concerts tours, we can remember the tour of Japan, 15 concerts there. But to make it continuous, it's quite an effort.
This is a final question. What would you say as a deputy director and general producer for such an important, I would say, institution? Because the Philharmonic is an institution today in Armenia. What is the biggest challenge that you have in your position here?
You see, to help the Philharmonic to have the best soloists and to stop brain drain at the same time. That was something which now I consider my life project. It took me a year nearly to write this project. It took me a year to promote it, and it just started to add just more funds to already working really a lot company, which is the Armenian Philharmonic Orchestra, which has a privilege to be supported by the president, by Vivasel MTS, and it helps people work. But we all realize that this is not enough in some sense to attract bigger names and to make people stay because they're constantly enticed, attracted by some opportunities abroad. If someone gets here from 500 to 1,000, which is really not so low in Armenia, but he suggested 2,000, 3,000 abroad, of course you will think that why not? Let's try to do it.
So it's about keeping the musicians in the country. It's about giving them
keeping our musicians in the country. It's not only, of course, my task. It's a national idea. I mean, to keep people stay in this country.
Absolutely.
It is so important thing, and my involvement is really very diminutive. I mean, I'm just doing my work with the Philharmonic, what I can do. But speaking globally, it's a way bigger problem than me or you or anyone else.
Sure, but if we all did our part.
Trying to do something that we can do.
Sure,
to write a project, to suggest it to people who can like it, and these people get together, this is important.
Well, you certainly don't have an easy job, because there are a lot of Armenian musicians I mean, if you go to any website of any orchestra, major orchestra in the world, always there will be an Armenian playing, and you know that they've always come from Armenia somehow, and that now they're playing in some of the major orchestras in the world.
We used to have a really strong music school in this country back in Soviet times, and now we are trying with the Philharmonic Orchestra to establish our academy.
Oh.
And you know,
that sounds promising.
This is something which may open another dose of perception for young musicians, because if our instrumentalists, which are actually the best in this country, will teach the kids, or via master class or private lesson, or this will be an academic year, let's assume 30 kids a year will be under our supervision. It means that they will learn more than from a conventional music teachers in the schools, which do a very important work from anyway. This is really important to have.
This will be added on to what they already do, and for the kids to be able to come and you know, imagine, you know, with the first violin being able to sit in the master class.
Yeah, the first violin will be able, the first oboe player, the first horn will be able to share his knowledge and skills with a young kid.
Well, Arman, I really want to thank you for allowing us into this world. Oftentimes we come, we sit at a concert, and we are, as we say in Armenian, hiatsats, and we go home feeling very proud and very good. And you know, we've spent an evening listening to some of the best composers in the world, but oftentimes we don't think what happens behind the scenes and how difficult it is to maintain an orchestra of 108 people with.
Yes, we're very lucky that we have our maestro Topchan, who is already 12 years in the office, and he is trying to introduce these eternal classics like Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Khachaturian on a very high level. We have pretty strong team here. Would be, you know, to give 40 concerts a year, from 40 to 50 every week, and there are culmination events such as the music festival. Yeah, it's not easy.
No, it isn't.
It's not easy, and important thing is that we want to introduce this music also to young people. We suggest information to universities, to music schools. We distribute even tickets for free, and we suggest them for pay. Of course, to the schools, when they are able to do it, they do it. And Philharmonic tries to, you know, to raise the level of awareness as well.
Well, it's amazing to hear, and it's really wonderful to know. And you know, again, I wish that there would be many more people like you in Armenia who are really working hard behind the scenes to ensure that, you know, in the chaos of our lives, we don't forget the importance of classical music and the tradition that we have of musicians and culture.
Thank you very much for having interviewed with me.